optimal health, financial freedom, finding your life purpose. It's called The Simple Life. I'm just doing it my way.
Welcome to The Simple Life with Gary Collins, your how-to guide for getting your shit together.
This is life. You gotta work on all these till the day you die. The only thing missing is you getting off your butt and doing it.
Hey, Carol, thanks for coming on. Got to hit record or we'll spend an hour bullshitting. So I've done it. Trust me. But yeah, I really enjoyed your book and I thought it was really important. I think I saw it about a year ago. I want to say this
9 months ago, probably.
Yeah. And I remember, and I saw you hitting the interview trail and all that. And I'm like, I get her on my show sometime. And actually a listener said, you need to get her on your show. And I went, I reached out to your PR people and they never got back to me the first time. But I bet because it's probably just, I know how it is. It's just mayhem in the beginning and you're getting hit by everyone when you do a new release, or it went straight to spam. Who knows? I say all my important emails go to spam. All the spam emails go to my inbox. So,
That's Gary's rule. I like that.
Yeah. And so I always check spam. I check spam a couple times a day. I do because that's where they usually go. But with the book, The War on Small Business, grab my copy here, show that I actually physically have the book. And you see it's all I see this stuff. Read. I do this. Oh no, I read every single book of every guest that comes on. I do not do that crap. But yeah, what motivated you to write it? Because the timing is perfect.
So I was actually approached to write a book by HarperCollins that would take a look at the historic economic moment that was resulting from the decisions the government made during the pandemic. And this was very early on. I had a very sharp editor who, Eric Nelson, he's amazing. He works with a lot of, the most best-selling authors in the country. And he just said, that this is a moment I need somebody who is credible to tell us what's happening, because this is going to be history. And like a total moron, I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. Yeah, that seems like a good project. Not having any idea how completely complicated and bananas it was going to be. So I went into it just sort of chronicling what had happened. And I'm a longtime small business advocate. In March of 2020, when they were working on the first quote unquote relief packages, I put out op-eds on Fox Business that said, don't screw this up for small business. I know you're going to screw them over. Here's how to not screw them over. So that's always going to be in my head. But given the fact that they were the first to be shut down and, the sort of the unfair burden that they shared, and then some of the decisions that were made after, as I was putting all of this together, it was clear that they were a really important part of the story. And despite the book being called The War on Small Business, it's really about a bigger topic. It's about decentralization versus central planning and sort of what's happened that's moved us away from capitalism to cronyism and this sort of centralized control. And small business is really the lens that I walk through the discussion with. But it's not, the only thing that's covered in the book. And so after putting all of this stuff together over the course of time, eventually we had to go to print on it. And, we didn't get to all the long tail things. I sort of alluded to this may happen or that may happen. But all the sort of long tail issues, from the disruptions in the supply chain to the disruptions in the labor force to the epic inflation that happened as a result of these decisions that were laid out. So that was sort of the impetus. And despite the fact that it was extremely painful, this was, as you know, since you've read it, an incredibly well-sourced book. There's hundreds and hundreds of sources, and I wrote 3.5 different books and had to call the last version down to make it something that people could actually read. So it was a hard effort. But I'm so glad that I was able to do that and to chronicle it and give people a real look at what happened for history, because the narrative has already changed on what happened. And so, I feel good about being able to make that contribution.
Well, yeah, you wrote it, you probably started it before COVID had really kicked in. You release it dead center. Now we're coming out because it's amazing how war cures viruses. It's the strangest thing I've ever
One more to flatten the curve.
Hey, yeah, just start a war. They figured out another way to make money. So now it's like, oh, that's quiet for now, even though get your fourth booster and you'll be getting your 24th before you die. But you talk about the difference between capitalism and crony capitalism, because there's a lot of confusion. Most people don't even understand what true capitalism even is.
All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to correct you. We're going to call it cronyism because capitalism has no crony aspects to it. So we'll call it
Fair.
capitalism versus. So the way I look at it is on a spectrum. People get very caught up in these names of things, and I'm much more focused on principles. So I want everyone to think of a spectrum. What I call capitalism, true free market capitalism, is freedom, choice, and transparency of many people making decisions with the guardrails of property rights. That's it. We all make transactions freely by choice. Everybody kind of knows what they are. Property rights are protected. That's capitalism. As you move away from that, you move to the other end of the spectrum, and you have a handful of people who are making decisions. They're making them using force, coercion, and control. Usually it's highly opaque. And a lot of times it's, without any sort of property rights, or at least there's some gray area and ambiguity. That is what I call central planning of any sort of flavor, any ism that you want to attach to it. So for me, I don't care what you call it. I just want people to be focused on the principle. It is something being done by the choices of everybody with that freedom and choice and transparency, or are a handful of people basically forcing stuff upon us. And we have unfortunately moved large parts of our economy and our decision-making from that sort of transparent and open free choice towards a handful of people. And human nature dictates that when you have a handful of people with that control, they are going to grant favors or do things that tilt the playing field. And who are they going to tilt it towards? Well, is it going to be all the free, independent people who are running around doing their own thing? Or are they going to do it to the handful of people who have a lot of money, who will comply, and who will also give them campaign contributions? And that's really kind of the struggle that we have going on. And unfortunately, capitalism gets blamed for a lot of things that really is the sort of cronyism, or big business, big government, big special interest triumvirates that's running the scenes. And because it may involve a private enterprise, it's like, oh, well, that's capitalism. And private enterprise does not equal capitalism. And that's one of the things that I try to impress upon people in the book.
Yeah, and you go into depth of, as a small business owner, I knew some of the numbers, obviously, because I'm in it. But most people also don't realize, and I kind of call it, I'm an Ayn Rand fan. So grew up reading it and a big Rush fan. So, talking about laissez-faire capitalism, right? That, it's transaction person to person. You have to look that person in the eye. Those who provide the best service are the ones who will rise to the top, right? It's a very simple concept, and government should not be involved in our transactions to each other on the consumer level. And that's where I think it's all gotten changed around. But most people don't understand that small business is that, and that it runs the economy of the world. It's not the US too, but the world in general. And you go into the numbers. Would you kind of expand upon what I just said about how big small business is into the world economy and the US economy?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I do think for people who are perhaps separate from the small business community, they may go, oh, well, it's small, so it's a niche thing. But it's actually the majority of business entities in the world. So small businesses comprise 99.9% of all business entities, not only in the United States, but everywhere around the globe. And in the United States right now, latest statistics, we're about 31.7 million small businesses versus about 20,000 and change large businesses. And the economy If you kind of take pre-COVID and assume that that still is the case, if you basically divide the economy in half, and half the jobs and half the GDP approximately are in the hands of the 31.7 million small businesses, 6 million of which have employees. And the other half of the economy is really concentrated in the hands of 20,000 big businesses. And actually, I did the math. Walmart and Amazon, out of every worker in the United States, 1 in 60 works for Amazon or Walmart. So that just gives you a sense of like the power and the concentration. So if you look at that, and you see who is independent and free and providing different levels of goods and services, it is that small business side. Whereas you have these big businesses who are highly concentrated and have a lot of money and are easier to sort of control and, kind of play that dance with big government. And that's why they lobby for anti-competitive legislation, things that keep other small businesses from being able to compete because they don't have the same kinds of resources. And they were the ones who were far and away the beneficiaries of the decisions that were made, both directly during COVID in terms of who could stay open and who had to close, but also the financial decisions that were made in terms of monetary policy that supported the biggest companies and gave them access to basically almost free capital to go out and compete with big businesses, or with small businesses as competitors who are already languishing because they might not even have been open. So it was really a 1-2 punch of, 1-2-3 punch: fiscal policy, monetary policy, and general policy decisions that really shifted the playing field and created the most historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street that we have ever seen.